My name's Eugene Worley, and along with my wife Glenda, we have spent nearly 50 years in ministry in Ethiopia, Norway, the UK, and in the US. I'd like in these podcasts to share with you some of our experiences from those years. You have heard the expression, what goes around comes around. After serving the Lord in Ethiopia, Norway, the U.S., and England, the Lord gave us a shock and reversed our course. We had been in England for 14 years, and it was time for a furlough. I'd been thinking about a presentation to show in our churches, and someone suggested we give an overview of our 30 years of ministry in Ethiopia, Norway, and England. That sounded like a good idea, but if we did, we needed some up-to-date pictures of Ethiopia. One thing led to another, and we decided it would be a good idea to visit the country. We were both excited about the prospects of returning to see both the country and our Ethiopian friends. One day we'd gone shopping and were sitting in a tea shop having a cup of tea when the conversation turned to our upcoming trip to Ethiopia. Glenda asked me a question about the country, and though she did not realize it at the time, at that very moment, it seemed God spoke to me and said, "This trip is not a pleasure trip. I have business for you to do." I was so shocked by what I was feeling that I do not remember how I answered her questions. She had some more shopping to do, and I told her I would take some things to the car and meet her later. I went to the car, and while there, I told the Lord I would do whatever He wanted us to do, even if that meant returning to Ethiopia. I knew this would be very hard for Glenda and wasn't quite sure how to tell her.
When God spoke to Jean's heart about our leaving England and returning to Ethiopia for a ministry, He said it took Him 2 weeks to tell me. Needless to say, it put me in a tailspin. We were so happy in England and had a great ministry. I guess I had a lot of fears because Ethiopia, having been under communist rule since the 70s, along with all the stories we had heard about the Red Terror, caused me to be much more afraid than when we went in 1968. During the time leading up to our trip back to Ethiopia, Jean had to make a trip to the States and I was alone in England. I read a book during that time entitled The God-Dependent Life by Joni Yoder. God used that to speak to my heart, and I totally yielded my will to His will. This little poem expresses how I feel about our lives and the way God has led us. My Father's way may twist and turn, my heart may throb and ache, but in my soul I'm glad to know He maketh no mistake. As we began to make preparation for our trip to Ethiopia, we looked for the best price on plane tickets. Those tickets took us through Cairo, and that was fine since we'd never been there before. We had to stay 2 nights, but that gave us time for some sightseeing. God worked even in that trip. We had gotten a good quantity of Arabic gospel tracts to take with us, not knowing exactly what we would do with them after we got to Cairo. We had seen a Chili's restaurant a few blocks from our hotel and decided to get a nice meal before our flight to Ethiopia. It was when we were returning from the restaurant that we saw this international English church. Jean went in and asked them if they could use the tracts. They were so happy to get them, so he returned to the hotel and brought them back to them. We were amazed that in a city of 20 million people, that our hotel was within walking distance of this church. It was certainly an example of how God directs your steps.
We had 1 full day to go sightseeing in Cairo, so we hired a driver to take us to the different sites. He first took us to a place where they made papyrus, which is the leaf of a plant that was used in ancient times as paper. That was very fascinating. He took us to another place and from there to see the pyramids. We had the choice of riding a camel or a horse. We chose the horse. That was an amazing experience that we will not soon forget. He then took us to the Cairo Museum, where you got to see the Egyptian mummies and many artifacts from ancient times. It was a tiring day, but a good day. We returned to the hotel for our final hours before our flight.
We left Cairo about 2 o'clock in the morning for Addis Ababa. I'm not sure what happened to me, but on the plane I got very sick. In fact, as the plane landed in Addis, I was in the bathroom throwing up. Whatever bug I had lasted for several days. I think Satan was trying to discourage us, but he lost that battle. It was so good to be back in the country and to meet our many friends and pastors from years past. We were even more convinced that we were needed, and this was where God wanted us. We went back to England, packed our belongings, but had to return to the States to support to our churches. Even in that excitement, I must admit that I left my heart in a teacup in England. After our furlough, we left North Carolina for the trip back to Ethiopia in September of 1998. We had originally planned to leave in June, but neither of us had peace about it. We would understand that delay better in August, when Jean's dad went home to heaven. So it was a blessing that God allowed us to be there for that sad occasion. His ways are higher than our ways. We were shocked at the shortages of basic household goods in Addis and were advised to bring as much with us as the airline would allow. This proved to be a challenge, especially when we checked in at the airport in Raleigh. We had been assured that we could take the extra baggage, but when we checked in, they told us we could only take half that amount. Apparently, we were given the wrong information, and we had to repack everything. If you can imagine us with our luggage and boxes all over the floor trying to unpack and repack, I'm sure we were quite a sight, and it must have been very funny to people watching us, but it wasn't funny to us, especially at that time. A sense of humor is helpful if you can manage to find it at a time like that. In spite of that, the airline people were very helpful, and we soon managed to get it checked in. Fortunately, the pastor who brought us to the airport was able to take what we could not ship back home. We realized later, however, that we managed without all that stuff anyway. Please listen to our next podcast as we talk about our return to Addis after nearly 30 years in getting settled and finding a house and begin our work.